All right, this is section 9.2, the Rise of Conservatism. I'm calling it Napoleonophobia because I can. I've never heard that before, so trademark, whatever. But in this section, we're going to talk about kind of the core principles and some of the events which were important primarily during the 1820s as the powerful people in Europe, as they've gotten out of the Napoleonic era, as Napoleon has been sent off to a far island where he's never coming back. He is going to die on St. Helena. Now what are these conservative people going to do to try to reclaim power and keep power? So the big idea for conservatism is keep the craziness of the French Revolution from ever happening again. You remember the French Revolution? A lot of blood, a lot of guts, a lot of terror, a lot of silliness, a lot of crap. You throw all that together, you get a big mess, and the people who were in power before in Europe didn't really get a chance to have their voice heard, especially in France during the revolutionary time. So, after 1815, we've got a period of history where the powerful are really the same players that we saw before 1789. The pets that you have for this unit, I will get to you at a later date. You'll probably be able to figure them out, and you should be able to. But remember that you'll be liable for all of them on a possible pet test. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Going over kind of the big ideas and what this conservatism is. And we've already done this. We've already got a set definition. But I think the most important thing to remember is this thing right here, is that they're believing in order, society, the state, faith, and tradition. Basically, they are taking what was old and bringing it back. Okay, a conservative thinks, and this is something that's not on the screen, but you need to get this. Conservatives really believes in three big things. Okay, they want to ordain and order society by these three things. One, you got a king. Okay, powerful king or a queen, whatever, but you got a monarch. Two, you have the nobility. They control the land, maybe not a feudal structure like we've seen way in the past, but the nobles have their political power back. And then third, you've got the churches. The Catholic Church has influence. The peasant class and even the middle class now have to depend on the church for some sort of social foundation. And the church is there kind of to keep the moral side of society straight. Okay, and what's interesting as well, I think, is that conservatives are not only, the traditional ruling class, but they're also the peasants. Okay, the peasants are ones that are wanting to keep things the way they were before 1789. Remember, they are very religious, so they want to have that religious backbone. They want to have things the way they are, so their lives, which are difficult, are not made more unstable. So make sure that you keep in mind that the peasants are also going to fall in the conservative class. Okay, basically they want to keep things the way they were before the French Revolution. But who are the enemies? And as you can see, it's quite obvious. These guys, I like this arrow tool. They are just going to make it red because red's well, that's not going to work. Never mind. Okay, let me erase. No. Get this arrow off of here. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Alright, I guess we'll have to live with it. Oh wait, is that undo? Will that work? No. Oh, here we go. Hey, goodbye. Alright, sorry. I'm just getting carried away. Anyway, the middle class are viewed as the threat. Remember, back in the French Revolution, it was the middle class, the third estate, the higher-ups of the third estate, the bourgeoisie, who got people stirred up in the first place. They did the tennis court oath. They founded the National Assembly. Without that, you may not have a French Revolution. Okay? And certainly you have also the lower middle class, the sans-culottes, who really did most of the damage, thanks to Robespierre and all those guys. So the conservatives see the middle class as the big threat. They're the ones that they're going to have to keep down and make sure that they don't come up and cause trouble again. Okay, so keep that in mind, is that you will never see a middle class person, a professional, a doctor, lawyer, businessman, any of the bourgeoisie factory class. You will usually not see them in the conservative side of political thinking. Now, who kind of drew this thinking up? Who's the mastermind of conservative thought? It's this guy named EDMUND BURKE, and we've seen him already. He wrote a pamphlet during the French Revolution decrying all the violence, decrying the craziness that was going on. He's saying, hey, you all are going to just end up shooting yourselves in the foot and cutting your own head off if you continue with fast-paced revolution. So his big thing is that you should go slow and steady for your approach to reforms, meaning that if you want change in government, you go about it slow. What's the hurry, right? I mean, you don't want to make all your changes in 4 years. Then you're going to make somebody mad probably, and then if you do all these changes, it's going to make more than somebody, make everybody mad, because somebody's going to get something that they don't want. So Burke says, hey, why don't you go about it a little bit slower, and then things might go a little better. So he didn't necessarily say that all government, and when I say change, I mean like we're going to give voting to these people who haven't had it before. We're going to let the parliament or the estates general or whoever be able to decide things more now. So that's what I mean by changes. He says if you do all that real fast, you're inviting trouble in. So you go about it slow and steady. And that's what a conservative would say. If you have change, you go about it slowly. Don't do anything rash. Don't be risky. Do it very, very, I guess, in check. All right, so he's more like the philosophical guy. He's the one who writes the books, says, here's how conservatism should be. The guy that we've seen already who really puts it in is Clemens von Metternich, okay, the foreign minister of Austria. He's not the king, he's not the emperor, but he's kind of the Cardinal Richelieu of Austria. He's the one who's pulling the strings, more or less. And he really, really, really wants conservatism to win out. Why is that? Okay, we'll hit that here in a second. We've already hit that in 9.1. He basically doesn't want the ideas of the French Revolution to take root in his empire. Okay, and if you remember what those big ideas of the French Revolution were, not life, because that's John Locke. We'll try that again. Liberty. Love my handwriting, right? Equality. And fraternity, which I will do as frats. So basically that's what he's saying is that, hey, we don't want these three things coming into Austria because, hey, they learned from French Revolution, if you try to introduce these liberal ideas into play, what happens? Chaos, craziness. So I don't blame him that much for thinking this way. But again, what's his other motivation? He's just not against it philosophically. Practically, Metternich also his empire, okay? Vienna, which is where Austria is centered, is right there. But all of this empire is under Austrian control. So what Metternich has to worry about is getting the Hungarians and the Moravians and the Bohemians and the Croats and the Slovenes and the Lombardians and the Salzburgians and the blah 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 blahs and these guys and everybody. I mean, look at the whole list down here. You got to make sure that all these people are under one roof. Because look, you got Italy right over here. You got the Ottoman Empire, which is pretty weak by this point, right over there. Russia is always by. Poland, well, they're probably going to crap out later. That's what they always do. Okay, Prussia is up here. So basically, if you're Austria, you've got all of this territory to worry about. You can't afford liberal ideas to come in. If they do, your empire is going to break apart. So that's what Metternich's real motivation is out of all of this. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what happens in each of the big five countries in terms of conservative events where they try to stamp out all these ideas. We're in Austria, so might as well talk about Austria and its empire. Again, big picture, as I put on the slide here before this, is that it's a big map, it's a big territory. You've got Germans, Hungarians, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Italians, Croats, all these people who the Austrian Empire controls. So Metternich will have to do anything in his power to stamp out any liberal ideas and liberal thoughts. So he's going to institute the Carlsbad Diet, which is in 1819, instituted by the Concert of Europe. And basically the Diet, which is like the Diet of Worms, is kind of a meeting of government officials who come in to decide things. They issue the Carlsbad Decrees. So they issue these plans which target liberalism where it's starting, and that's in the schools. So they go into the universities, and they're going to drive out the ideas that are trying to crack the three major pillars of conservative society: the monarchy, the nobility, and the church. Okay, basically, if any teacher is talking about the Enlightenment, like I did half of last semester, you will go. Okay, you get fired. Any student organization, kind of like Dumbledore's army in Book 5, for those of you that have engrossed yourself in the Harry Potter universe. Any student organization that is fighting against the establishment will be kicked out, will be eliminated. They were actually monitored by student spies. Materials that push for German unification, that Germany would break off from the Austrian Empire and combine itself with Prussia, they would become censored and they would be eliminated. So again, everything that even whispers anti-conservative thought, the Carlsbad Diet is going to go after, and again, Metternich is behind all of this. Here's the excerpt from the Carlsbad Decrees, blah, 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 blah. Basically, teachers who come out against the imperial government, I love how they are the abuse of their legitimate influence over the youthful minds. I am causing so much abuse, or propagating harmful doctrines hostile to public order, all these fancy words. Basically, if you're going up against the imperial government, anti-conservative thoughts, bam, you get the boot. And you're out. Okay, a little bit about Prussia. Not really much going on. The Hohenzollern dynasty, remember we looked at the Fredericks, all of those guys in the 18th century, Frederick the Great and all them. They're still ruling. The government and the Junkers or the Junkers or the nobility, they're going to put down all the liberals, nationalist movements. That's going to be a bigger deal later in Germany around the year 1848, but say right after 1815, there's really not much going on in Prussia. So again, 1815, really no conservative movement. Now in England, though, that's a different story. England's government, again, had always, not Edmund Burke, Edmund Burke, had always said is that, hey, you got to go about things slowly in instituting change. Well, government and society hit a little hiccup around 1815. Parliament passed what were known as the Corn Laws. Basically, the foreign grains or corn from other countries, which were cheaper, could not be imported. So you could not bring in foreign materials. So that means that the people who grow the corn at home can sell them from however price they want. So they're going to make a lot of money, right? Those that have to buy the corn, they're going to buy it at any price. Okay. They also repeal habeas corpus, which pulls back on an individual's rights to hear what they're accused of, so the government gets a lot of power. Well, people start to get upset. And at the Peterloo Massacre, which was 4 years after the Corn Laws, some people in Manchester got together at Peterloo Square and said, hey, these Corn Laws are dumb. They're causing the poor people to spend too much money, which, they got a point because, again, the nobility can drive it up as much as they can. So a very, very liberal crowd against the conservative government at the time went after some of the police. 11 people were killed, 400 were wounded, 100 women were wounded too, so that's really sad. But anyway, after this, the press as well, the government really struck back, and the press was had rights taken away, so the press are losing rights. So basically, when you talk about freedom of trade, where people can go and get the corn they think is best for them at the price they like, that's gone because they can't go out and get it because of the Corn Laws. And now you have restriction of press rights. So again, in England, things are getting more and more conservative. And here is a lot of stuff going on. I think this is the Peterloo Massacre. I think that's why I put it in. Here's a floating baby's head. I don't know. I'm going to stay away from that. Okay. These guys look like Oompa Loompas. Whatever. Peterloo Massacre. Kind of the conservative outcry, or the liberal outcry, if you will, against conservatives in England. They were very, very upset. That is for sure. Okay, here's freedom of the press, whatever. More newspaper accounts, blah, blah, blah. He talks here about, was it the meeting in Manchester, an unlawful assembly, and saying, hey, was it bad for them to, get together to complain what the government's doing? Maybe not. Who knows? Bill of Rights, right? I mean, it'd be a good plan, but led to a lot of people killed, so I don't know if that's a good idea. The government, whatever they said, they're proceedings of the magistrates justifiable, blah, blah, blah. Basically, they decided it was an illegal meeting, so again, government versus people. That's really what conservatism is it's not very friendly toward people's rights. It's keeping those three old identities of church, nobility, and king in power. So it's very, very against this new wave of what the French Revolution. All right, so France. Well, what do they do after Napoleon? Okay, so this is after Napoleon's been kicked out to St. Helena. He's done. Well, Louis the 18th. Okay, so 18th. He becomes the king, and he's the king of a constitutional monarchy. And they actually have something right after he becomes sole king, and he's wanting to rule with kind of like a, hey, let's talk about it, let's share government. We don't want to go back to where we were. But this event happens called the White Terror, which is as terrifying as it sounds. Basically, all these people who support the king are going to go out and murder all the former revolutionaries. So this is like the Reign of Terror in reverse. It's taking the people who propagated the Reign of Terror, and now they are the ones on the chopping block or under the guillotine, whatever. This doesn't go on for long. It's only a year-long thing, but Louis XVIII really doesn't do much to stop it. He's going to, while saying that, he's like, hey, let's just work together. France is going to be awesome again with Napoleon. He really is. Because remember, I mean, his brother was the one who was killed, so why wouldn't he want to get back at those people? I mean, that's like human nature, I suppose. So maybe he had that angle going for him. Who knows? But as time went on, Louis got more and more conservative and reactionary. That means that you really react and just respond to the events that are happening. And the longer he was in power, the more and more he got to in that reactionary stage. Okay, so France, along with these other countries by 1820, really conservative. Okay, that is really where we're going. A little more about France. In 1823, and we'll talk about this in, I think, 9.4 with nationalism. France was not originally part of the concert of Europe, as you know. Remember, right after Napoleon, they were kind of in timeout. But when Spain rebelled against its Bourbon king, remember the Bourbons in control in France as well. France came in to restore the Bourbon back to the throne. So again, you got Bourbons in France and Spain. But in 1820 as well, the heir to the throne was killed and murdered in France. So now these liberals are really they're like revolting, trying to get freedoms for the Spaniards. They're now like murdering the heir to the throne in France. So again, Louis, this is the exact same bullet there that's in bold. He gets more reactionary and more conservative the longer that he goes. And France basically is a conservative state. 1820, that should be 1829, by the way, is when the heir to the throne that is killed. And King Louis really at that point shifts a lot of things back. To be honest, I'm not sure if Louis was still the king at that point in 1829, but anyway, by that point, press was censored, the education of Frenchmen was back to the church's hands, sedition, publishing negative things about the government led to arrests. So again, all of these things are conservative ideas. In France, which was the hotbed of liberal, equality, fraternity, liberty, all these new Enlightenment ideas. Now they, even in France, are being silenced 10 to 15 years after the end of Napoleon. Again, it's a very, very conservative time in Europe. The last country, the last of the five. Russia is as conservative as they come. Alexander the First, who we've talked about, he dies in 1825. It leaves his younger brother Nicholas to become the new czar. Whenever you have a power transfer, you're like, okay, this may be a time for change. You got a new guy, maybe he's going to view some new things. So there's some in Russia who said, hey, let's maybe get some more reforms, some changes to help the little person out. Let's see what we can do. So the Decembrists, which were junior military officers, they would support liberal reforms in the government. They were like, hey, let's, again, give some more ideas for, the poor people, for peasants, for serfs. Not much of a middle class in Russia. They didn't really roll that way. But, hey, they're wanting that. But they can see up front that Nicholas is not going to want to play that game. And this revolt does not last long. Many of the Decembrists are killed. Some are run off. He actually, this is a pretty, I don't know, funny may not be the right word, whatever. He was like taking all of the people to be hanged, the Decembrists, here they are right here, and he like put them off the rope and everything, and then you like let the stand go, and then you drop down. Well, it was so cold at that time that the ropes split. They like snapped because they were so cold. They couldn't stand the tension, and then by tradition, if that happens, it's like God coming in and saying, "Hey, you're supposed to go free." It's obvious that God didn't want you hanged. Well, Nicholas doesn't listen to God. He just hangs him again. And the other ones, he like runs off to Siberia because that's what you do in Russia, basically, for people you don't like. So, again, absolute power, no written constitution. If there is a conservative place in Europe at around 1830, 1825 to 1830, it would be Russia, and then I would say Austria right behind it. But Russia, you have definite absolute power still. So basically our themes that we've looked at with conservatism, you got to have your three strong pillars. You got to have the king, the nobles, and the church. You look to shut down any liberal ideas from growing, and you basically want to have things as they were before the French Revolution. It's not very creative, but it can be very, very violent, and as we saw in the period from 1815 to 1830 in Europe, that's really the heyday of conservatism. You have these things coming up. Okay? So again, keep those ideas in mind, and then as time goes by, the conservative hold over society is going to begin to fail.